attending today's webinar, Securing 5G Networks, Service Provider Perspectives, sponsored by F5 Networks, FORTINET, NetNumber, and Palo Alto Networks.
Thanks, operator, and welcome everybody to today's webinar, which is entitled Securing 5G Network Service Provider Perspectives. My name is Jim Hodges, and I'll be moderating and presenting at today's webinar. So in our session today, as we indicated in the abstract, we're going to be presenting a number of key findings from a comprehensive 5G market leadership program survey that we conducted in January and February of this year. So we have quite a bit of material, so we're going to move quickly through the introduction. So first of all, I would like to introduce our speakers today. We have with us 4 speakers from the sponsoring companies. We have with us Mark Campbell, Application Security at F5. We have with us Vinod Sunduraj, who is the Senior Director for Security Product Marketing at FORTINET. We have Peter Vinstra, who is Senior Manager Product Development at Security and Routing at NetNumber. We have Lakshmi Kandadai, who is the Director of Product Marketing at Palo Alto Networks. Welcome all. Looking forward to the discussion. In terms of the agenda, really today's webinar, we've kind of broken into 4 different sections, and each covers a related security topic. And these topics we're going to start off with include 5G security impacts, things like the impacts of slicing and automation. We're also going to talk about 5G security implementation strategies and business impacts. We're also going to look at 5G security control plane considerations, and then we'll wrap up with implementing 5G security services. We'll also do some Q&A, but as I said, we have a fair bit of material, and we'll have probably a limited time for Q&A, but I will take an action item to reply to all questions so we can address them by email after that. I will do that. We also aren't planning to conduct any poll questions either, so we will, again, take your questions and try to get to them, or I'll answer them after the event by email. So in terms of the survey, just a bit of background, it was really a comprehensive survey, 20-question survey. It was really designed to assess 5G security on a number of different levels, looking at the technical business readiness, looking at security use case priorities, but also the role of advanced capabilities such as automation and content inspection, and even some of the security-related challenges. So as I said, the survey was developed in Q4 last year. It launched in Q1 of 2019, and it attracted 103 global respondents. At the end of the presentation today, there's a link where you can download the white paper where we provide more information on this as well. But let's get into the first section. So we're going to start, as I said, we're going to have the first presentation. We're going to look at 5G security from a perspective of slicing and automation. So I'm going to bring in Mark Campbell from F5. So welcome, Mark. Looking forward to the discussion. So let's jump right into things here. As I said, slicing is an important part of, obviously, 5G networks in terms of it's a major capability. It's positioned as driving a lot of revenue. It's positioned as driving a lot of service innovation. So we really wanted to understand the important, because given the importance of top group, we really wanted to understand sort of the timeline for when specific security slice capabilities would be supported. We could develop a number of different slice capabilities, things like validating users in a slice, applying security policy in a slice, monitoring traffic in a slice, and also slice lifecycle management. These are all kind of foundational parts of network slicing. And so from a timeline, we really want to understand when would the investment take place. Would it take place before launch, or right after launch, or sometime after launch? And you can kind of see here, a key takeaway is that, a third of the respondents, sort of the 23 to 30% range, plan to invest in specific slice capabilities before launch, whereas the largest group of this, 38 to 40%, said they plan to invest soon after launch. So to me, it really confirms that slicing is still pretty much is very much top of mind, and it's an important part of the rollout. And for almost a third, it's something they're going to invest and have before launch. So, Mark, what are your thoughts on this from some of the service providers you're talking to?
Well, thanks, Jim. Yeah, great question. So, while we'd like to see security as part of the original design, we are glad to see that at least top of mind for most of the respondents. So we really expect that there'll be continued use of some of the existing 4G security solutions. For example, many of our existing customers that are using F5 for the SGI LAN are exploring how to apply some of these same controls, like their firewalls and CGNAT, into the slices. Others have implemented some of the more advanced features like IPS and IoT solutions, but when we talk to our customers about planning for slice lifecycle management, security is definitely one of the topics of discussions. Many of the discussions lately have been focused around security policies for APIs and portal protections, including authentication. So we understand that the primary effort is, first and foremost, is to get the 5G infrastructure up and deployed. Slicing is an advanced feature of this deployment, so it makes sense that slicing and the security that goes along with it won't necessarily be mature with some of the first rollouts of 5G services. So it's going to take some time to evolve the full slicing lifecycle management, and of course that includes the security that needs to go along with it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Although I should say that, coming back from World Congress, slicing is important capability, and I think the timeline here, it is going to move pretty fast. But we also want to understand encryption. Obviously, encryption 5G networks, because we're opening up interfaces in the core and the RAN. That's a really important part. So what we wanted to also understand was sort of preferences for securing data on different network layers in the new radio, so sort of the front haul and also backhaul interfaces, and also even on sort of the NGC, the Internet, so the GI LAN equivalent. And you can kind of see here that, not surprisingly, IPsec kind of comes out as sort of the strongest option, or the most preferred option, sort of the 41%, 54%. But also TLS definitely had support, areas of support in terms of, you can see in the middle there, sort of the 25 to 34% range. But interestingly, we had a question here about other, and that other was kind of interesting because it kind of shows, I think there's also an opportunity as the networks evolve. There are some opportunities for other things, and one of the things we know is happening in industry is kind of the supporting of HTTP over QUIC, which is the Quick UDP Internet Protocol. That's kind of being discussed by IETF because it provides a sort of enables low latency services for HTTP2 services. So I think, as I said, we know that IPsec is going to remains relevant, so is TLS. I think this chart to me also kind of shows that there are some discussions within the industry of other encryption methods as well. Again, Mark, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I'd love to know a little bit more about what the other was, but the use overall of encryption was what we expected, but these results showed even more pervasive use of encryption than we thought, really, especially with IPsec. Right. So we've seen a rise in TLS over the past few years, but for tunneling of traffic between the network elements, IPsec still seems to be the gold standard, and we've seen a lot of our customers use the F5 IPsec capabilities to tunnel from data centers to the cloud. So we expect that we're going to see more IPsec from the 5G core to the internet, especially when multiple cloud providers are in play.
Okay, you think that'll happen both on sort of front haul and back haul, right? Because I think that's the kind of the new wrinkle in all of this.
Right.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. So, security policy adoption, or automated security policy adoption. Obviously, automation is kind of seen as kind of the future of security. So we also really wanted to understand how and when service providers would support automated security policy for 5G services. And there seems to be kind of a number of different themes here based on the inputs for the top three. The first preference is to launch 5G with manual policy, using additional staff, and then adopt automation over time. The second one is to launch 5G without automated policy, but without hiring additional staff. And the third one was to basically not launch commercially 5G services without automated security policies and hire additional staff. So the kind of 2 and 3 are sort of the go-to-market strategy to use automated policy, which to me I think is aggressive. And then the number one, the 29%, is to sort of introduce manual policy, launch 5G manual policy, and then roll into automation over time. I think also kind of, to me, relief is that only 8% of them said that they would launch 5G services with manual policy using existing staff and adopt automation over time. So I think there's some important things here. First of all, if you are going to use manual policy, you are going to need additional staff, but also 2 and 3 kind of point to the importance of supporting automation security policy. And again, I think that's an important topic. This is an area that's really moving quickly, but I think there's kind of a lot of opportunity here. So I think this is, to me, is kind of provides a level set that shows just how important automated security policy is. Would you agree with that, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we've seen customer adoption of automation across the board, so all aspects, not just security. But the NFV movement really kick-started this many years ago, and we've seen increased interest in security automation over the past few years. So what we hear is really what's driving this is a need, because there's more security controls in place, which means there's more policies to manage, and they've just got to do a better job of doing this, and automation can help. Of course, there's the business need to reduce the Opex and improve the efficiency of the existing staff level. So I think the staff level question was very important there. And then also to be able to increase the predictability and automation of some of the routine things, right? So automation really helps across the board there. And we have to keep in mind that security automation right now, it's not easy, or it's not necessarily standardized. So customers are finally getting control of automating the network configurations, and then security really builds upon and integrates into that. So it's great to see all this happening.
Yeah, maybe another consideration, just to kind of close the feedback loop, the first slide we showed about slicing. I mean, this is obviously, we did look at this in the survey. We did some filtering, and there's obviously, I think, a relationship between implementing slicing and automated policy as well, because obviously, as you kind of introduce more complex security requirements in terms of policy enforcement with slicing, then there's kind of a need to do that. So this 29% kind of goes along with that 29% that they wanted to implement slicing from day one. So I think there's like you said, there's a number of different factors here in terms of sort of the rapid adoption of policy, the move to automation, and I think the industry is moving fast with commercial solutions. That's pretty relevant or pretty apparent from both Mobile World Congress and even RSA a few weeks ago. So yeah, okay. So let's move on to the other chart that's applicable to this section. That is about Opex. We wanted to understand. There's been a lot of discussion about the value of automation, but we also want to understand just how operationally automation can impact Opex reduction, or can it? So we basically we understand the implications on the previous slide in terms of staffing implications, but we also again wanted to see, okay, so let's sort of boil that and take it to the next level, understand kind of the range of Opex potential for a broad range of security. So we used a number of different sort of use cases here, from securing portals and a slice, securing public cloud applications, securing private cloud, providing control security inside a slice, again, related to slicing, and also even setting DDoS and attack and mitigation thresholds. So kind of interesting here, there seems to be sort of the major groups see that the Opex potential associated with automation is kind of in the 10 to 25% range. You kind of see that in that sort of that middle bar there, the red bar, and sort of I think that's important, and I think that's a realistic and pragmatic view. But you have, so the other side, you have sort of the group of people on the more than 25%, sort of in the 20 to 24% range on the far left. Kind of see a real opportunity for even more than 25% Opex reduction, and then on the other side, on the far right, sort of the 27% to 31% see sort of less than 10%. So I think if you combine the two together, if you combine the upper group and the middle group, that kind of gives you about 70% of the respondents forecasting at least a 10% reduction in Opex, which to me is considerable and significant in my mind. What do you think about this, Mark?
Well, this really aligns with what we're seeing with many of our customers, and there's opportunity everywhere to automate and help reduce some of the Opex. And even at 10%, which is at the lower end of your middle group, right? That's a major savings considering the scale of all of the staff and technology. So it's certainly a worthwhile effort, without a doubt, to continue to invest and build out the automation. So even if the savings aren't quite up to the 25 or the 25 or more, right? It's still significant. So this is an area that we've been continuing to invest in, and really with the goal of helping customers to automate, particularly in security, right? We're looking at some of the basics. What are the things that can be done to remove some of the traditional security blockers, which is the complexity of configurations and deployments, and these can really hamper security implementation. So there's certainly a lot to be done here, and it's great to see that there's high expectations of what automation is going to do for them.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to move on now. We're going to move on to the next section. So let me just move on to the slides here. We're going to bring in Vinod. So first of all, thanks, Mark, for your insight into the input here. And Vinod, let's bring you in here and talk about 5G security strategies and business impacts. I mean, we've discussed some of the drivers and impacts of slicing and automation, but we also wanted to, in the survey, gain greater insight into implementation strategies and kind of related business impacts. So this is kind of the section that we'll be talking about. So first of all, I think one of the key points we wanted to gain insight into was the impact of 5G on service delivery models, so we could understand the service delivery implications. And if you look at sort of the first chart here, it was really designed to provide insight into a couple of different statements in terms of looking at whether or not there'd be business disruption associated with different business models. So we basically asked a series of questions. Do you agree or disagree? And the first question related to 5G resulting in a greater focus on B2B service delivery models, 5G resulting in a greater focus on B2C, so business to consumer, and also 5G disrupting business models. You can kind of see here from the key takeaways that the first starting point is that 60% of the respondents agree that service disruption really is a reality and that it will be basically something that will take place. And then you have 95% seeing that there'll be a greater focus on services directly related to B2B services, and 76% seeing a greater focus on consumer markets. So to me, this shows that there are also some opportunities, some business opportunities, and it kind of reflects obviously things like services like slicing are going to be disruptive. And in a way, we always knew that, but obviously these metrics are pretty strong in terms of the agree side. So what do you think of this, Vinod? Are you hearing this from your service providers on this?
Oh, yes, Jim. I mean, these findings are definitely, I don't think it's a big surprise for most people who are following 5G. Expansion into B2B service delivery is certainly at the heart of the service provider 5G transformation. Our service provider customers view 5G as a critical path to expand their revenue streams and improve their profitability. Many SP customers of ours have either already rolled out or are on their way rolling out IoT services, such as IoT connectivity services, device monitoring and management services, data management, and IoT security. For IoT security, they're focusing on verticals like manufacturing, oil and gas, retail, and even enterprises. This is to control and secure vulnerabilities in IoT, such as weak authentication, lack of strong encryption, classification of IoT devices, applying appropriate device policies, IoT device policies, and end-to-end network segmentation are seen as key techniques they are planning to implement in their IoT infrastructures. In fact, some of them are already doing that. With respect to B2C service delivery, what we see is that, for example, enhanced mobile broadband is a key use case in 5G, and this is seen as a new avenue by our customers to offer 5G as a viable alternative, in fact, a better alternative to existing broadband technologies. What they feel is that the customers can get, the benefit of having the best quality of experience for, I would say, new age applications that use AR and VR technologies.
Right.
And they can also consolidate their connectivity needs with one service provider. So, the way they look at it is 5G provides them an end-to-end innovation platform, and they can utilize it as a catalyst for value creation and service innovation.
Right. Okay. And that's kind of where we wanted to understand. So that's a good point you made in terms of the value proposition. And so we also want to understand sort of the service implications. So we developed this sort of list of sort of generic, sort of all-encompassing security use cases that go from the core, signaling core, front haul, back haul, the low latency services, enterprise mobility, IoT, data rate, sensor security, roaming network, and MEC, and also API exposure. So we use this list throughout the survey to provide kind of a common comparison base. But so this question that we also asked, kind of related to this, was looking for how that would, I guess, generate a timeline for when they would support different services. And you can see here, based on the kind of the commercial launch, again, tying it into the automation discussion we just had, about 47%, 44%, 35%. The kind of the top three priorities are looking at the signaling security systems, kind of cloud RAN. Again, that's a new opportunity, and also looking at core network services, including slice management. So, but even the lowest ranking API use case, API 19%. This is something that we do see that, you know, if you look at the priority in the sort of 1 to 2 range, it comes in at 48%, which is the highest. So I think all of these are important. It's a matter of kind of the timeline of where they're focusing on. And I think kind of, again, looking at the timeline, you know, they're going to start with kind of the core and the RAN and move forward. Any surprises there from your perspective, Vinod?
No, actually, you know, we hear the same, and, you know, it's not a surprise. Core network signaling security is the top priority, you know, given that the architecture of 5G next-gen core is quite different from 4G EPC. There are new signaling functions, and there's a big shift to HTTP, you know, version 2 based, API-based interfaces. Also, you know, the elimination of the radio network controller has resulted in direct and unprotected signaling of user plane paths, both in case of you know the 4G infrastructure that we have today, and even the upcoming 5G, you know, between 5G NG-RAN and 5G NG-C. In 5G, for example, you know, this exposure can result in manipulation of access management functions, session management function, and user plane functions. So core network signaling being a top priority is therefore no surprise. With regards to Cloud RAN and front haul and backhaul security, it is, you know, our customers say that it has always been important to secure the RAN, and it becomes even more important to secure Cloud RAN. RAN is typically, you know, in remote sites and sometimes in leased or rented spaces. You know, therefore, you know, it is very critical to ensure that the RAN is authenticated, front haul is protected, and then IPsec or TLS is used to tunnel the traffic back into the core. So, you know, your findings pretty much mirror what we're hearing from our customers.
Yeah, again, these are all important. I think it kind of shows that commercial launch category shows a lot of moving parts here. Okay, let's move on a little bit, talk about, this is an important one, I think one that we wanted to understand, get a kind of a good view on, because obviously whether or not the service provider implements non-standalone, kind of the 5G RAN with the 4G core, standalone 5G RAN and 5G core has implications with security on a number of different levels, including slicing support. You can kind of see here that kind of the 55 to 65% plan to launch security, these comments of security use cases using the NSA option, non-standalone. Obviously that does simplify security. It does obviously limit maybe some of the security reach of some of these services, but I think this is also another reason why there's a strong focus on the cloud RAN to keep signaling and also control core networking, because these have to be supported in any configuration. Any surprises here, Vinod?
Actually, you know, these findings also reflect the guidance we're getting from our customers. We are hearing that it will be a 3-step transformation over 5+ years. Like in 2019 and 2020, next 2 years, many of our customers are focused on rolling out what is called option 3X, you know, which is the NSA where 5G NR RAN would exist alongside LTE RAN, but the core would still be 4G EPC or virtual EPC based. With multiple RAN types, you know, cloud RAN security will be super important. And the next stage of the transformation from late 2020 and in 2021, we will be seeing mainstream rollout of what is called option 7X, which will be the upgrade to 5G next generation core. And it will support both LTE RAN and 5G NR RAN. So again, network signaling security is important because all the new interfaces start to show up here. From 2025 onwards, we expect to see widespread 5G deployments. So yes, to your point, you know, we are hearing the same from our customers.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the last question then. Again, looking at that same common use case, base of use cases, we want to understand kind of where they would invest sort of their capex, so the 5 to 10% of the 5G capex, 2 to 5%, less than 2% are not sure. And it kind of shows to me again, sort of it kind of confirms that sort of the focus is going to continue to be on the Cloud RAN, which makes sense because obviously a RAN traditionally is a large part of the investment, so there's only makes sense if you're opening it up that you have to provide additional security in front haul and back haul. But also it's interesting, core network signaling you just talked to, Vinod, in terms of the customer requirements. We're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in the next section. But also things like IoT, data center security, all these things. And I think I kind of came back from World Congress, kind of a renewed sense that IoT is moving a little bit faster than I thought, and it is kind of a strategic imperative for a number of service providers. But even enterprise mobility services are important. Again, what are your thoughts here in this input?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, one of the things that I didn't touch upon with respect to the RAN transformation with 5G is, there will be macro cell densification, which is needed to deliver the performance and bandwidth and high-speed connectivity connection scale needed for 5G to fulfill the promise that for IoT. For both the low latency IoT and the massive scale IoT use cases that it's supposed to cater to. So we pretty much it is super important to secure the Cloud RAN, and there are many of the interfaces. It could be Wi-Fi, it could be LTE, and it could be 5G. So many different security implementations need to be done to secure that. With respect to managed security services, definitely 5G opens up a door to expand the already hot managed security services market, which is at this point from analysts we hear that it's growing in double digits and is supposed to grow in double digits for the next few years as cybersecurity needs for enterprises continue to grow rapidly. Enterprise mobility security services, will be a key growth driver for SPs as employers and their employees embrace 5G. Enterprises need their employee BYOD and corporate devices, to adhere to IT compliance policies consistently, regardless of the access network that is used. It could be Wi-Fi, it could be LTE or 5G. Right. This provides, SPs an opportunity to offer appropriate security services and, make it a revenue driver for them.
Right.
And, yeah. That's pretty much what we're getting to. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're going to wrap up this section here. So, Vinod, thank you for your thoughts and kind of confirming these trends. We're going to move on now to the next section. We're going to talk about the control plane in more detail, and we're going to bring in Peter from NetNumber here. So, Peter, looking forward to the discussion. As I said, we've already heard that control plane is kind of an important part on a number of different levels. Again, I've been sort of thinking about the implications of control plane for a number of years when I first started looking at the architecture of the service-based architecture of the NGC. So it's interesting if we look at the first question that we provide in the control plane section of the survey. We want to sort of assess confidence levels, extremely confident, and again, using that standard base of security use cases, you can kind of see that about extremely confident response moves from about 9% to 29%, with most confidence kind of happening in the core network, the ability to manage slices or signaling services or Cloud RAN, and then kind of drops off to almost 9% of API exposure with third-party service providers, which makes sense because this is brand new territory. But to me, what's also important is if we look at that confidence, somewhat confidence, sort of the benchmark is kind of the confident responses, sort of in the 42% up to 51%. But also the not confident or somewhat confident, that's a large number as well. That kind of number goes from sort of the 28% all the way up to sort of 36%. So if you just take the somewhat confident and the confident responses, and you kind of put those together, and even the non-confident together. If you take the somewhat confident and not confident responses, that kind of pushes, in some cases, like for MEC Edge, kind of pushes it over 40%. So to me, I would have liked to have seen sort of a larger percentage of extremely confident responses than simply confident, and a lower percentage of somewhat confident, not confident. But Again, this is obviously to me something it's a work in progress. We know there's going to be a lot of implications on the control plane. I'm just wondering, Peter, what are you hearing from your service provider customers on this topic?
Hi, Jim. Thanks. Well, we hear similar concerns because 5G comes with different challenges for these applications. IoT, it is, of course, the major numbers that the billions of devices that will be connected to the network. So you can expect cycling storms as an effect of that, but also the malware vulnerabilities because of the cheap devices in sensors and cameras, etc. Also the human absence of it or ignorance that people are not aware of security. Mobile edge computing, it is a multiplication of computing power that will be added to the networks that also ripple through and has repercussions in the core elements. So that is also to be seen what the expectations are and what will the effects be in practical networks. And API exposure is also an issue because of the new trust model, since there are multiple actors becoming part of the control plane as well. So those are, say, actions that we can expect, but also the further increasing complexity of the networks is, of course, an issue. And in the control plane, it is the radical shift that is coming due to this trust model, network slicing, distributed service execution, the use of internet protocols. So it is a complete mix of things that will happen. And we also see that in other conversations, because I'm also editing an investigation in the GSMA about 5G security, and also there you see the respondents having concerns because there are still a number of issues not being clear and resolved in the standards. So it is not all solved. People are not knowing what will be the replication of all these developments.
And I just put the second chart up. This to me is kind of sort of provides sort of, more feedback or more input or more confirmation of your point you just made in that, if we look at when we ask the respondents, to agree or disagree about things like 5G really be more difficult to secure, greater need to have signaling protection for multi-protocol attacks, the need to have distributed firewalls, need to have be able to, deal with more 5G signaling storms. Seeing they'll be common in Iran. Things like topology hiding, 5G signaling storms in the core becoming more common, more fraud. I mean, you look at the numbers here, like 70%, between 60 and 70%, pretty much agree that these are all going to be issues that are, things that we didn't see to the same level in 3G and 4G. Kind of, what are your thoughts here, Peter?
Regard in a pure 5G ecosystem, the security concerns we have seen in recent years with number 7 and diameter are expected to be solved because of the security by design principles with the security edge protection proxy, the SAP, and the security encryption over the N32 interface. That is all being pushed by the GSMA in the previous years in 3GPP, and happily it was being accepted just in time. So it was a last-minute addition to the 5G standards for release 1. But that is fine, but the problem is, of course, that there will be no native 5G ecosystem from the start. It will have the coexistence with the existing number 7 and diameter world, and that is less secure. And the main risk is introduced when access to the interconnections are being provided via number 7 and diameter, and the receiving operator expects the same trust as can expected in the 5G with the SAP elements and the N3T way. But also the speaking place.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Peter. Well, I just pushed up this next chart. Maybe you can talk about it here in terms of the SEP, because on this next chart you're talking about SEP. SEP, as you said, was included in the commercial standards. But when we wanted to understand sort of the requirements to support some of these 5G control plane capabilities, things like SEP, things like the network repository function to secure network function discovery, also the network exposure function. These are kind of the three, and even the 5G HTTP2 firewall, those four kind of stood out to me in terms of being able to have these capabilities at commercial launch. Almost a third of them saying they need them from commercial launch, and then kind of the largest group said they need them, I guess, within 1 year of commercial launch. So again, that kind of goes to what you were saying about the SEP in terms of that it's been included in the standards, but it's going to take some time to actually move that model or to actually commercialize that. Is that a true statement?
Yes, and people are convinced that the SEP and the new M32 interface are bringing more security to the mobile roaming traffic between all the interconnected operators globally. But they also recognize that there are fundamental issues still not being resolved for really putting it in practice between operators. So in the so-called 3GPP release 15, that is for the immediate implementation of 3GPP for 5G, there are fundamental issues missing, like error handling, failover mechanisms, etc. And these will first come in the next release. And consequently, the expectation is that the first release is ready for deployment in islands, so within the domain of one operator, and that it will take some time before operators are really there to have their networks being interconnected.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the last slide. So we wanted to understand. We talked about firewalls, sort of the need, and you talked too about SS7 interworking. We want to understand sort of the implications from a 3G, 4G firewall perspective, because obviously there's a lot of this investment already in the network. So we want to understand kind of some of the hot buttons or the most extremely important buttons related to what additional capabilities firewall should support to kind of be able to support 5G. And based on the extremely important one, 5 HTTP2 diameter interworking was kind of the top one, SIP interworking, but even things like fraud integrated with security correlation checklists, including location correlation was important. But even 5G, HTTP, and SS7 interworking was important, as were things like support for fallback to 4G and 3G networks, and even private LTE network support. So to me, if you look at those extremely important, kind of in the first 3 or 4 kind of, I would say, aligned with what I expected to see, but even shows that, firewalls need to be able to support a wide range of protocol interworking. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. We already see, because of the growing fraud incidents, that also other protocols are coming into place, like SIP. So the complexity of the protection is increasing. And we also have to recognize that behind the vulnerabilities is a complete industry nowadays. And they also have the same knowledge, at least as the operators. And the fraudsters are moving faster than the operators normally. So the concerns are really about the interworking also with the older cycling protocols like number 7 and diameter. And it is also to be recognized that the older cycling protocols are still growing very fast in volume because of today there is no alternative yet for all the machine-to-machine and IoT applications. So there is big numbers of devices and sensors now being interconnected in the old-fashioned way to the operator network, and those are also roaming entities because of the cars that are moving around, people having healthcare devices with them. Those are all roaming devices. But even in the static case, many operators are launching these type of services, and that is based on roaming agreements in other networks. So we see a lot of incidents now starting to happen because of the sensitivities of the roaming services for this type of applications. So signaling firewalls is also there an issue to protect the networks, and the multiple protocol defenses are an important aspect that operators need to implement in their networks.
Right, and seamless interworking is kind of the rule of all this, whether it's in a slice or not. Okay, well,
thank you.
Excellent feedback on this, so I appreciate your input, Peter. We're going to move on now to the final section, and we're going to bring in Lakshmi here. We're going to actually take a look at kind of some of the security considerations for importing so Lakshmi, let's bring you in here. So we kind of started off with a question that we included in the survey that was related to security as a service offerings in terms of, we know that this managed security service market is going to continue to grow with 5G and in enterprise services and slicing. I think it's going to grow even at a much greater rate than it has over the last 18 to 24 months. But we really want to understand kind of how important some of these different attributes are in terms of providing value add to security as a service offerings, things like application visibility and control for IoT services, things like being able to do correlation based on IMSI, to be able to correlate the subscriber, even the device information, to be able to correlate that to a threat. Because we're really moving to kind of an mobile edge-based network that's really kind of service-aware. So a lot of things have to kind of come into place where we have to be able to understand the subscriber authentication and trust model, and also look at the device or the PAN-EI, being able to correlate that. So, and then also kind of you have to throw in automated policies as well. So, when we ask based on these extremely important responses, there's a number of them are important. I'm just kind of wondering, from your perspective, what do you think of, if you look at the extremely important responses and kind of the rankings here, what are kind of your takeaways from this?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. This chart really highlights key security focus areas, and it kind of aligns with what we were expecting. And almost all of these functions, all of these security services are important as service providers evolve their networks, but I will briefly touch upon some of the top 3 or 4 security services that we really need to look at. Right, especially the ones starting with application visibility and control for IoT services. Now, with 5G absolutely changing the delivery mechanism and even the consumption mechanism for all these applications and services moving into the network, right? They are no longer catered from all the way from service providers, from the internet edge, but they are moving closer to the subscribers into a multi-access edge compute environment, right? And it greatly introduces a highly distributed computing environment. So for service providers, in order to cater to these IoT services, it is important for them to be able to provide the needed application visibility. And on top of that, the other important aspect here that I wanted to highlight is analytics and correlation-based security. Typically, when a security event happens, a mobile operator spends anywhere between 15 to 30 minutes to correlate the source of threat, which IMSI or which IMEI was responsible for this particular security event. correlating all the logs, that is either from the HSS and the IDS logs, or even data from multiple probes, right? So it is important to automate the entire correlation of NZ and IMEI correlation to threats, and that way the security event, the root cause of these events can be detected and taken action on. And one other aspect that is even more intriguing here is the prevention and detection and prevention of Mirai type malware. Pretty recently, our Palo Alto threat research team, Unit 42, has discovered a new variant of the Mirai botnet, and this time it is impacting devices that are intended to use by businesses. And as we looked into, some of the other participants highlighted on 5G resulting in greater focus on B2B services, it becomes important for service providers to have a prevention-oriented approach in their attack tackling mechanism. So all of these, especially the correlation capabilities and the automation, is very much important. Yeah.
We're going to go back a little bit because we wanted to understand kind of frequency of outages on services, signaling related disruptions and outages. So we wanted to understand kind of when we created the control plane question, we want to understand sort of where service providers are, kind of a benchmark, and you can kind of see this is numbers based on sort of the number of signaling related service disruptions that they're experiencing on their current networks. That's the important part here, and you can kind of see that 39% basically less than once per month, kind of 0, 1 to 2 times per month, 34%, so 35 times per month, 21% and 6%. So that obviously I think is kind of a good starting point. We did see in the previous chart on the control plane that there is a lot of sort of somewhat confident or confident responses about 5G, but Lakshmi, your view is I think that these numbers are still going up, even though we're doing a pretty good job as an industry. These numbers are still going up.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, we did a similar survey in 2014, and it is interesting to see that the attacks from a signaling, perspective, it is increasing year over year, and it kind of reflects the attack landscape that service providers are going through. And especially attacks on signaling and control plane traffic can overwhelm service providers' critical network elements. And with 5G and Internet of Things opening up new usage scenarios, in some cases they increase the impact or demand on signaling, even more so through a throughput demand, right? Especially when we talk about machine-to-machine services targeting the massive machine-type communication segment, where these M2M applications place more demand on signaling than throughput. So that kind of summarizes the fact that service providers have to look into the signaling traffic, impact of signaling traffic on their mobile network infrastructure. And especially the primary causes of signaling disruptions that we are seeing here are either from a signaling storm or signaling flood. It can be, signaling storms on the radio access network, either through, S1 AP, or it can be signaling storms coming in from the roaming points of interconnect on the S8 interfaces, or even diameter signaling, right? All of these plays a huge load on the entire mobile network infrastructure. And we also see that attackers increasingly, leverage abnormal GTP-C control plane messages. So it's important to tackle the entire signaling attack perspective, tackling signaling storms and tackling providing deeper visibility into the control plane elements is important as well.
Right. And to your point here about signaling and control plane, I mean, this question or this chart I just showed up, basically pushed out, kind of relates to, again, it's an agree, disagree, but it kind of relates to security signaling for interoperator networks, so between operator networks, or things like even traditional network interfaces, or even the value of things like content inspection, which we're going to talk about in the last chart, but also the need even to secure the 4G PC with the adoption of the 5G non-standalone. To me, there's kind of a key takeaway here is that there's a lot of moving parts, like as you talked about, But if you look at the agree statements here, it's it's definitely in the 88%, more than 80% range, or more than 76% range for the EPC. That kind of shows that the requirements, the fundamental requirements, are changing between not only sort of what GI LAN interface, but also for interoperator signal as well. We have other questions that we can't have time to go through today, but we had questions related to fraud and to roaming that are in the report as well, that kind of validate these sentiments as well. But any surprises here from your perspective, Lakshmi?
No, in fact, what we are seeing more increasingly is these signaling security between interoperator networks, right, that is roaming interconnects. They are mainly because of the excessive connectivity and massive connectivity of UEs moving all around, right? Especially IoT and M2M roaming opens up newer interfaces, interconnect interfaces. So that is more important to protect. And we are also seeing that service providers have been experiencing, especially in a roaming scenario, reconnection requests coming in from a roaming network causing a signaling storm in the home network. So that is an example where your roaming network can be a cause of the entire problem for the home network. So that those interfaces has to be secured well as well. And the other point that I wanted to highlight here in this chart is how the traditional throughput and session demands on the GI interfaces are getting even more minimal, especially with the introduction of MEC or multi-access edge computing, because apps and services now move into the subscriber edge and with a highly distributed environment. So service providers are increasingly looking into embracing application visibility and for application awareness and content inspection for malware, command and control, and other vulnerabilities. So even more so at the edge. So that kind of reflects on what we anticipated from the survey as well.
Okay, perfect. Okay, let's move to, we talked about content inspection. Let's take one final chart here, and that is kind of the importance of content inspection. As I said, we're moving to this totally sort of service-aware end-to-end network that's going to require sort of end-to-end security policies from the RAN to the core. And again, if we look at the extremely important response levels, for the value of using full content inspection to gain insights into attacks or vulnerabilities or malicious URLs or malware, again, it kind of stands out that extremely important response are pretty high, especially in the RAN, 42%, the 5G core, even for roaming and the GI talking interface. Again, I think this kind of validates what you were just talking about. But are any surprises here from your perspective?
No, absolutely not, because we believe in the fact that you cannot secure what you cannot see, and especially that applies in a mobile network scenario where all your traffic gets, passes through the GTP mobile tunnels, right? And complete visibility inside all across your entire network and across all layers, including your GTP control plane and user plane, is especially important when as service providers undergo this transition from 4G to 5G and as they embrace newer architectures. So no surprises here, and we definitely see a need for the complete visibility to track. Even if it is a smart meter scenario where your IoT devices get connected to your network, you definitely need to understand what's going on in that particular activity that's happening from a smart meter type of a scenario. Or you might also want to track the network activity and also perform detection and blocking of command and control traffic. And again, it drives the point that you need to see what you have to control and what you have to block. So content inspection plays a huge role, and we are absolutely not surprised by this finding.
Yeah, I think if you take content inspection and automated security policy, those are the kind of the keys. So thank you, Lakshmi. So I'm just going to sum up really quickly here. We do want to give a few minutes for questions. So I think as there's a high-level conclusion slide here that for me it's pretty clear that the initial, and I said initial in italics here because things are moving very quickly in the 5G security world. So the initial focus is on the core RAN and control plane. And even though while less than a third of respondents plan to invest in slices before launch, it's still, it's come out very clear in this survey project. It's still very, very, very important. And obviously, the control plan is we've nailed here and driven home a few times here that the 5G control plan is definitely more complex to secure than previous generations. But also, from a business perspective, CSPs understand that 5G will disrupt their business models, and including their security service. But they're also, I think, opportunistic and looking forward to how these new opportunities can be achieved in both B2B and B2C markets, which I think is a positive. And finally, I think automation. Almost half the respondents, about 47%, said they're committed to implementing automated security at commercial launch. And I think that, again, that's a positive as well. And then 81% of respondents we just saw said that 81% said that content inspection is really vital to provide insight into attacks. So again, we've for the audience, we've covered a lot of material here, but we want to kind of give you a sort of the biggest view possible, and most holistic view with a lot of data to kind of that all ties together. So we put a lot of data in here, and I apologize for that, but I think when you have the charts later on, you'll see the kind of the points from the subject matter expert we've had in the call here. I think really kind of drives home and kind of confirms what the survey results are saying, kind of with where the industry is going. So there are a couple of questions that I'm going to try to get to, but also while we're doing that, again, there's a link here where you can download this white paper related to the survey project on this link if you wish, and we'll go from there. So there are a couple of questions. One question was related to implementing 5G. What about things like voice over 5G services? How important will it be for security for those kinds of services? There's, I think, a couple of moving parts there. We did see on one of the data points in the chart related to the need to be able to support SIP interworking with HTTP2. And when I can think about the 5G next-gen core, there is kind of a link to sort of SIP applications outside of the sort of that service-based architecture. So to me, obviously, the voice will be kind of it's going to follow the voice over LTE model and move in that direction. So I think that's also an important part of that as well. Anybody have any thoughts on that, on sort of voice over 5G services quickly for the audience? On the panel?
Hi, Jamie, it's Peter.
Hi. Yeah.
It is also, in terms of fraud, sometimes needed to know what the roaming status is of a customer. So you have the call being established via SIP, but you need to know via your SIP and firewall whether such fraud case is viable or not.
Okay, that's good.
And the number 7 and diameter comes into place in HTTP2 in 5G.
Okay. Okay, well, it's basically at the top of the hour, so there's about 2 or 3 other questions here that, as I said, I will commit to replying to you via email. I'm sorry we didn't get to your questions, but again, we had a lot of great material here. We had a really strong panel and presenters, so I wanted to allow the subject matter experts time to present and provide their insights. So we're going to stop the presentation here in the Q&A, but as I said, I'll get back to you with by email to your questions. So first of all, I'd like to thank the sponsors for attending and presenting in today's webinar, and also for being a part of the research project that we did earlier this year. And I'd also like to thank you, the audience, for attending and providing us the questions, and also just listening diligently to all the challenges and all the opportunities associated with 5G security. So for light reading, this is Jim Hodges. Again, thanks to our sponsors and our speakers, and also thank you, the audience, for attending our session today. Hope it was helpful.